Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming along and joining another PFFA workshop evening. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by the wonderful John Metcalf. I'm just going to give you a little information on John as before we get going. John is a permaculture designer, a regenerative soil consultant, land steward, climate observer, teacher, and student of nature. John's been studying to deepen his knowledge of life from the microcosm to the macrocosm for the past 14 years and has been researching a broad spectrum of disciplines to understand the patterns and cycles within the natural world, including ancient civilizations, one of my personal favorites, astrology, electric universe theory, geology, natural climate variability, soil biology, philosophy, and psychology. Doesn't look too dissimilar to all the things that have been interesting me. So really glad we've got John with us this evening. What we're going to do, guys, is John is very kindly going to share some information with us this evening or this morning. I see we've got some people here from New Zealand, so good morning to you all. And what we're going to do is John will go through that, and then towards the end we'll do sort of a 15-20 minute Q&A, and we'll address the process around that towards the time. But what I'm going to do is pop myself on mute, hand you over to John, and yeah, let's enjoy this evening. Thank you.
Hey, so welcome everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Catherine. It's great to have everyone here. I see some familiar people from last time, so that's really cool. I hope you all enjoyed last time and you're making use of the slides that I sent across. So yeah, my name's John Metcalf, as Catherine said. She introduced me, but I kind of don't like giving myself a label. So all those things, you know, I'm just a seeker of the truth, really. You know, I really want to know how the world works, you know, but my desire is to kind of pass knowledge on to people. And I'm a bit of a machine when it comes to absorbing information. So I rapidly absorb information, but it takes me a while to digest it. So the stuff I'm going to give you, like I did last time, some of it looks complex, but these are really basic principles to know if you want to grow really healthy food and be self-sufficient. It's about understanding the processes that are the kind of the foundational mechanisms for how life works. So that's really important. Just as I think I said this before last time, but when I was at school, I was a terrible, well, the school said I was a terrible student. You know, I got terrible marks according to them. I was the person that looked out the window and was daydreaming all the time. And I was, you know, always reprimanded for it. But I'm really glad that I did that, because I'm a contemplator. You know, I'm very much in the space where when we sit back and contemplate and just let our mind drift, we can have these amazing insights. And that's really important, especially when you're growing food, because you're going to come up against a lot of mistakes and a lot of things that might put you off, and you think you're not doing it, you know, good enough, and you know, so, and it feels like you're failing, but you're not. That's what I'm trying to say, is failure is just like a word that we've made up. A mistake or a mistake is literally that you've just not captured the whole picture. So by having this objective view of things, you know, when we take our emotion out of making a mistake, it's really empowering. And, you know, out of that list of things that Catherine gave, being a student of nature is probably the biggest gift I've given to myself, because I can take my ego out of it and all the thoughts and all the stuff that says you're not good enough or whatever, and really just engage with how nature works. And when you just sit back and observe the bees and the birds and the other insects, all kind of integrating into the system, you start to realize that we can be part of that system as well. And that's where the magic happens, because that's where you start getting these really good results. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so growing your way to self-sufficiency, a beginner's guide to garden-based sustainability. So I'm going to go through these slides. There's 96 of them, so there's a lot of information. You'll get the PDF sent to you. So it's, if you have any questions at the end, just ask them. But I just want you to know that in a workshop, we'll kind of go, maybe not into more detail, but these slides will make more sense once we start to kind of put it into context of what you can do. And remember, this is all for next season, so there's plenty of time to learn. Okay, so it all starts with seeds. Seeds are the life of everything, including us, right? So I started with seeds, and I started to realize that how important seeds are. So everything the seed needs to germinate is contained within the genetic material, the microbes, and the nitrogen required to grow into the seedling stage. But not every seed is designed the same. We all probably know about GM seeds and F1 hybridized. They've been around for about 100 years, thereabouts. But heirloom and heritage seeds, these are the best. So what's all the fuss about? So heirloom and heritage seeds are the closest we have to what we would have had hundreds of years ago. They're essentially seeds that have been true to type for 100+ years. Fortunately, there are some very wise people that saved seed and kept it safe from the big companies. We need to do the same, because companies like Monsanto Bayer, you've probably heard of these, are attempting to patent all seeds and make it law that all seeds need to be GM or F1 and brought from them. So heirlooms and heritage seeds are able to learn from their environment, adapt to changing circumstances, and pass on these qualities to their offspring. They are the only seed that will grow true to type. And what that basically means is, when you grow a seed and you save it from an heirloom and heritage, it will always have the characteristics of its parent, as well as being able to adapt to changing circumstances. So these are the seeds that are really important for the future. So I buy lots of different varieties of seeds. Some have come from places like Turkey. And what growers have done is they've adapted them to the UK climate slowly over the years. And the seeds actually learn what the changing environment is doing. Seeds are really smart. Plants are very highly intelligent. So they can climatize to our environment, but it does take generations. But this is something we've been doing for a long periods of time. So it's really going to be essential in the next years and decades, as our climate has greater seasonal swings. You might have realized this. We kind of went from summer to autumn really quickly. As part of my research, I look at how the climate changes. And I noticed in London, we had like an 8-degree drop in just a couple of days. So for plants, that can be deadly. You know, that can kill them. You have an early frost or a late frost, farmers can lose loads of crops. But there's ways that we can kind of adapt around that. And having these heirloom seeds is one of the ways that we can kind of mitigate against that. So where do you get these heirloom and heritage seeds from? So I use Real Seeds. The website is there. I've been using them for 5 or 6 years. And they're really, really good. If your seeds they guarantee like 90-something% of them germinate. If they don't germinate, they'll give you free ones. they're really like very, very happy about the way they grow, and they've been doing it for about 15 years, I think. And so they're either heirloom, open pollinated, organic. They're never GM or F1. Chiltern seeds as well, a company I've recently come across. They also look pretty good. They've got a lot of heirloom varieties. So ones that you might not find on real seeds, you'll find on Chiltern. So what seeds are you going to sow? This is something that took me a while. Really only about 3 years ago, I started to plan for the spring at this time of year. And there's a few reasons for this, because I do little plans for myself. So I write what I'm going to sow, how many I'm going to sow, where I'm going to put them, what they're going to go with, all those kind of things. But the other kind of practical element of this is somewhere like Real Seeds, they start selling out their seeds in like December, January. So a lot of people start to rush and try and buy all their seeds in February for March, and quite often they're sold out. So I suggest if you want to, go onto the Real Seeds website, and they've got some really awesome varieties on there. So I would always suggest buying a variety of each species. So if you're growing tomatoes, for instance, get 3 or 4 different varieties. And this is for a number of reasons. So diversity allows us to select the best type that grows in your microclimate. So you might have 3 tomatoes that you grow in your garden, for instance, and one of them does really well and 2 of them don't fare so well. So that particular type of tomato likes where you're at, basically. And if we do suffer from disease or pests, the chances are that it will only affect one type. The potato famine, which everyone knows about, one of the things that led to so many people starving was the fact that they only had one type of potato, and it got blight and it knocked out everything. And different types of species offer a variety of uses. So again, with tomatoes, some are really good for making tomato sauce or passata. Others are good for eating in salads. Others are good for baking. So just think about that. Think about your requirements and what fits for you, and then kind of base that around there. Real Seeds have a really good description under each of their vegetables about what they're good for, and because they eat their own veg that they grow. Another question, which is really important, and this was mentioned in last month's webinar, but what is your pH in your soil type? This is really important to know, because that will determine what you can definitely grow if you're not going to change the pH of the soil type. So knowing this will determine what seeds we can grow and in what area, because you might have a variety of areas that you can grow. Of course, we can change the pH, and that will happen throughout the year. So our pH actually goes up in the spring and the summer, and it will go down in the autumn and the winter. And we can also upgrade our hardware, so the soil types. So whether you have clay, sand, or silt, or a mixture of them, we can actually amend these things based on what we grow. And if you go back to last month, you'll be able to have a look at the techniques that you can use to change your pH and your soil type. So test your soil and your compost. I can't emphasize this enough. It's again, this is something I didn't do for years, but I've got into the habit of it now. So I test at the beginning of the season, I test like halfway through, and then the end of the season. And it's really interesting to see the way it actually changes just with things like sunlight and moisture, and even like wind changes the pH to a degree. And you need to know where you are now and set your intentions for where you want to be for the coming season. So if your pH is above 7, I highly suggest you go back to the previous webinar and look about how you can actually decrease that pH, because the ideal zone is between 6.5 and 7. So, sowing in pots or direct sowing. Now, some people may only be able to sow in pots, which is cool. They both have advantages and disadvantages. So there's always been this kind of debate whether to go in pots and then transplant, or whether just to sow in situ, what we call sow in situ. And there are many experienced growers that will always start their seeds off in a greenhouse or similar. It has many advantages. For instance, we can get a head start. It extends the growing season, especially in temperate zones. And also we can protect them to a degree. So if it's really windy, we can bring them in, or they're protected from that wind. And there are also advantages to direct sowing. So the seedlings won't suffer transplant shock as the roots are exposed to the air. This means they're less likely to be in distress and won't attract pests, disease, and pathogens. So when you transplant a seedling, obviously the roots are hitting the pot. When you take it out, those roots are going to be exposed to oxygen. What that actually does is that oxidizes the roots. That loses energy in the roots, and that is why they're more likely to, at that particular stage when you first plant them in, they're very susceptible to attack. They actually send off signals when they're in distress, and that's a thing for pests to come along and eat them. It's just the way nature works. It's quite amazing. So if you do choose to start off seeds in pots and transplant them, then using microbes can really help to establish the seedlings into the soil and will mitigate the shock. So again, last workshop I mentioned about EM, which you can buy online, but you can actually spray that onto the roots when you're transplanting, and that will actually help to prevent too much oxidation, but also it provides a protective barrier on the roots. So if you do choose to direct sow, then having the right soil temperature will help your seeds to germinate quicker. You can also use EM to coat your seeds before you plant them. This will re-inoculate them with a biological coating they lose when we dry the seeds the previous year. So anywhere you buy seeds, they would have been dried out. And we can go into this more in the workshop, but every seed, when it's formed on the plant, it will have a film around it, which is like a microbiological protection. And that protects the seed to a degree from the elements and other things that could possibly disrupt that seed germinating. So by re-inoculating it with things like EM, there are a number of different things you can use. This will actually help to establish that. And this might seem a little bit alien to you, but it's really not that difficult. Like, loads of people are doing it around the world. So plant spacing. This is, again, something that's been in contention for quite long. A lot of people do this kind of intensive cropping. You might have seen this on YouTube. And they're growing loads of plants in one area. About a year ago, I also thought this was a good idea, but then when I started to come across this new information, it made a lot of sense. And it's really basic, but sometimes we can kind of get caught out by the simplistic things in life. So plants need many factors to help them maximize the most from their environment. Okay, spacing is critical. Without enough space for foliage to spread, plants cannot get adequate light, air, or water. And these are really important elements for a plant. We're connecting the 4 elements together. We're connecting the soil, the water, air, and light. So this leaves them more prone to airborne pathogens and will also inhibit photosynthesis. Okay, so we want to give each leaf of every plant we grow enough access to sunlight as possible for photosynthesis. we also need to ensure that when it rains or when we water it, they're also getting, you know, that water's able to fall down into the soil. And also with air, if we haven't got a nice airflow that goes through our ecosystem, i.e. our plants, then this is when fungal pathogens, and sometimes bacterial pathogens, the airborne ones, can actually take hold, because too many things crammed into one space creates a humid environment. Okay, so below ground is the same. We need to give the roots of plants enough space to stretch out, just like we need to stretch sometimes, and have access to water, air, or that's meant to say nutrients. So the soil has these interstellar spaces where the air and the water can flow. And so I've repeated that. I was re-editing right at the last minute. So what is your climate? This is really important to know. And there's a couple of different places that you can look for this. In the workshop, I'll go into more detail about this. But these are questions that everyone would best ask themselves. So how many growing days do you have? So this is the average amount of days per year without frosts. So we'll have a first frost and a last frost. And the growing season will be between those two dates, basically. So when are your first and last frost dates? In Scotland, obviously, the further north you go, the less growing days you have. Having said that, you do still get microclimates in places up north. So it's not, this is just something to take into consideration. So where does your site sit in relation to the sun during your growing season? I don't know what's happening with all this anyway. So this is called your aspect. So if you have a south-facing garden, you're going to get sun for quite a lot of the year. North-facing, you're going to get most sun during the summer. During the winter, it will probably be too low for you to get a lot of sunlight. Okay. So in further relation to this question, where does the sun rise and set in relation to your site? This will change due to the season. So again, I'll go into this in more detail in the workshop. But it's really interesting to know, and there's a few different programs out there that you can use on the internet that will actually give you an idea of where the sun sets in relation to your coordinates, so your longitude and latitude. It's a really cool tool. And how much precipitation does your site receive every year? This is something you can look up online, but that will give you an understanding of how much water you're going to get. And then you can take the appropriate action to keep that water on site or catch the water in a water butt. There's loads of different ways to do that. And where does a prevailing wind come into your site? So these might all seem abstract questions, but they're really important. This is something I learned in permaculture. All these things will determine where you're going to put your plants, basically, because you want to think about this stuff so you understand, like, where's my tomato plant is going to get the best possible situation it can get so it can give me the most tomatoes and I can get the best seeds from that. So in temperate zones, there'll be a summer and a winter prevailing wind. We tend to get like a southwesterly wind and a northeasterly wind in the summer and winter, respectively, in the UK. If you're in New Zealand, it will be different. So that's something to think about as well. And what areas of your site are shady and what areas receive the most sun? Again, there are shade-loving plants, there are sun-loving plants. And so when you do this work in advance, like preparing, it will make things so much easier for you. Like, trust me, like I've spent so many years like getting this wrong. And what do you want to grow? This is like such an important question. Years ago, I wanted to grow everything. And then as I've got more experienced, I've started to streamline those things and realized that sometimes the quality is better than quantity. Of course, we want to grow as much as we can. But if you love squash, that's great. I love squash, but they take up a lot of room. So, but there's ways that you can grow more in one area than you think. So how much space do you have? Again, a really important question. So work out how much space you have and what you can grow there. You can do it by just working out the square footage. Remember, there's even things like vertical growing. So if you've got a small space in area, you can still grow up. And you can even do that with things like squash. So that if you make a strong enough trellis, and they can grow up as well. And remember, give your plants space to grow and photosynthesize. This is so vital for plant health. This photosynthesis is like, it's so important to remember this because, and this is why, like, when you're looking at buying seeds, it should usually tell you, or it might take a bit of research, look how big those plants get. And that will tell you how many of that plant you can plant in an area. That way, you're giving the plant enough space to express itself fully. Biodiversity. So to have a healthy, thriving ecosystem, we want to replicate nature. Nature is the best teacher, as I said. This means polycultures. So that's simply growing different species in the same area. So some plants are synergistic, which means they work together, and some are antagonistic. So this brings us on to companion plants. So these are plants that complement each other. I'm sure some of you have heard about this before. And they do this in various ways through spacing. So you can grow plants that grow at different levels, or they have different root depths. You also grow plants for pest protection. So herbs are really good because they're very aromatic. They actually disguise the smell of other plants that insects can usually detect. And also nutrient supplement. There are certain plants that are very good at accumulating particular nutrients, like phosphorus, for instance, which are really integral to plant health, especially during the fruiting and flowering stage. These are a few, you'll get all these slides, but these are various different combinations you can use to grow particular plants. They're tried and tested. They've been tested for decades. It all works. So I think there's something for everyone there. And just work out what works for you. Recently, I've started to incorporate flowers, which are really good to incorporate because they look very pretty, but also they're great for pollinators. And that's something I missed for years because I just wanted to grow food. But we've got to think holistically as the whole ecosystem. So guilds, these are an extension of companion plants. These are 3 or more plants that form a cohesive relationship. So one of these is the Three Sisters. This was, I think it's the Cherokee Indians that kind of brought this into the forefront. And that was corn, squash, and beans. This is mine this year. I think this was taken in July. So you can see the squash plant at the bottom there with the big leaves, and then the beans growing up the poles, and then a bit further back you can just see the corn. It works really, really well for a number of reasons. But as I was talking about with the companion plants, you've got the spacing. So the squash are all what can be low, and what they also do is they protect the soil. If you can see, there's shade in the soil there. So that helps with erosion of water, which means you have to water less. The beans are growing vertically, and the corn back there That's the other thing, is that sequestering a lot of carbon, which is really important for soil health. Also, the beans are fixing nitrogen, because the squash love nitrogen. They're heavy nitrogen feeders, which is one of the reasons they grow so big. So these plants are all performing at least one function, usually in this case like 2 or 3 functions each. And the great thing about this is at the end of the season, when you've harvested the edible parts of the plant, you've got all this biomass. So all that biomass can either go in the compost heap, or you can chop and drop it, stick it on the soil. That will decompose into the soil and feed it for next year. So there are also the 5 cousins. This was actually created by my teacher. It's not quite adapted to the UK environment. You can make a few changes to do that. So amaranth, buckwheat, cowpeas, daikon, radish, and sorghum. They all have a function like the 3 sisters. I can go into that more in the workshop. But just quickly, daikon, radish are really good tillers. They can grow like that big. So they're very good at, it's called biological tillage. The sorghum is very good at fixing carbon, like the corn. Cowpeas are very good at nitrogen fixing. Buckwheat is a very good phosphorus solubilizer. So they all have this, and amaranth produces so much seed. Not one of my favorite grains, but some people might like it. And the great thing is anyone can create their own guild. There are so many out there to kind of discover. So if you like growing fruit trees, or you've got a fruit tree in your garden or on your allotment or wherever, then these are an amazing way of combining perennial plants with annual plants. So this is one I tried this year. So around my quite mature plum tree, I planted comfrey, gorse, sunflowers, chives, and alfalfa. The gorse and the alfalfa are nitrogen fixers. The comfrey is a great bioaccumulator and also really good for making like kind of fertilizer, and creates a lot of biomass. So at the end of the season, you can chop that down and compost that. Sunflowers, they accumulate heavy metals. They're also really good tillers. They've got a good deep taproot. They attract birds, butterflies, bees, and chives are good for eating, obviously, as well as the plums. So this, you can't see it very well because this is early in the season, but obviously there's my plum tree. You can probably see the sunflower that's kind of, it's in the vegetative growth there. And around it, right at the back there, there's a gorse plant. It looks a bit spiky. And then you've got the alfalfa around there as well. That's ground cover. The chives are hidden somewhere in there. I think they got a little bit shaded out, actually. So annuals, biennials, and perennials. I used to just grow annuals, but they all have their advantages and disadvantages. So annuals are amazing for providing your seasonal needs. I would never suggest anyone not to grow annuals. And they can be grown throughout most of the year, even overwintering. So certain types of beans can grow over winter. So they kind of shut down during the winter, and that will be your early crop for the spring. They produce flowers, pollen, and seed, which is amazing for the pollinators and for ourselves. We can harvest them the same season. We can save seeds from them. But the downside to annuals is you do have to disturb the soil. It doesn't matter too much when you're first starting out, but if we're trying to build soil, then you just need to bear that in mind, that's all. But it's all contextual, obviously. So biennials, these behave like annuals and can be harvested like annuals in the first season. So for instance, carrots you grow, you can harvest the carrots. So on my allotment this year, I've harvested loads of carrots, but I've left a couple in the soil because I want to take the seed from them. So in the springtime, the seed will form on the carrots, and I'll use that seed, dry that out, and then use that seed that same year. They require a very cold snap to produce that seed. This is the nature of a biennial. So you can go that way with your carrots or your parsnips, and there's a bunch of them that you can look at. So just bear that in mind, that if you're growing something like carrots, you can crop some of them and leave some of them in the soil. So there's a couple of things that are really good about biennials. They fill the hunger gap. So that time between kind of March and April, early March and end of April, before when we've used the rest of our stuff that we've stored, and when we start producing new stuff in the season, they can fill that gap. And also they're really good for pollinators. So when pollinators first come out, there's not much growing, depending on the temperature. But these are really good for that type of thing. So these are a list. I'm not going to read all these out, but these are a list of biennials. Easy to find. There's loads of them. Some you can leave in the ground. So Brussels, kale, and some onions can just go all the way through the winter, depending on the type. And others you'll need to store. So you can actually carefully take them out of the ground, put them in a bucket, and keep them at a temperature between 0 and 7 degrees. So during the winter, if you've got somewhere like a garage, it's not going to get much above that temperature. So they'll be quite happy there, as long as you keep the roots covered in the soil. Perennials. So these are becoming more of a favourite of mine. In the winter and early spring of this year, I'm going to actually plant a lot more perennials on my allotment, because I want to, it will become clear, but perennials are really hardy. And really, if we look back, like kind of geologically, perennials have been around a lot longer than annuals have. They actually take a lot less maintenance. At the beginning of their life, you need to pay them a little bit of attention, especially like fruit trees. You need to do a lot of watering. But their lifetime can be between anywhere 4 years to decades. So obviously fruit trees will last for like 50, 60 years. They do take longer to establish. But if you've got the time and you love fruit, for instance, then they're a great kind of option for you. And they will become more abundant as the years go by. So fruit trees tend to start off quite slow and not produce a lot of fruit, but then over the years, they'll keep getting more and more abundant as long as you take care of them. So what do plants need in their infancy? Okay, plants are very vulnerable at the beginning of their life. So they need protection from the elements, warmth, enough sunlight, and protected from strong wind and from being eaten. So they also need connection. So from the nutrients to biology and the energy of the soil, we can create that environment in a number of ways. So we can grow them in situ, which basically means we plant the seed where we intend to grow the plant. When potting on or transplanting, we inoculate them. And we can also give them a boost with nutrients. Okay. So what plants really need? Plants need more than nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. As discussed in the previous webinar and workshop, once they're past the seedling stage, plants start to require other macro and micronutrients, along with the connection to the microbiology. We can amend with and make many of these nutrients ourselves. So how to grow plants that can stand up against pests, disease, and pathogens. So I warn you, this is like where it gets a little bit complex. So plant health, just like ourselves, plants have specific needs to reach full health. What plants actually need is specific nutrients and biology. So we've kind of always known this, but it's only recently that the science has started to come out to kind of give us more insight into this. So there are 4 stages to this, which was set out by John Kempf. John Kemp's decade of study, research, and trials. So he's a really interesting guy from America. He basically left school when he was 13, so he's completely self-taught. But he's just one of those people who's just like, I'm very much in awe of. So he came out with this thing called the plant pyramid. I haven't used that because I don't want to, nick his kind of invention. But so there's 4 stages, as I said. Stage 1 is complete photosynthesis. So as I mentioned before, giving the plants enough space to photosynthesize properly, this is one part of it. So photosynthesis is the plant's capability to complete the full cycle of photosynthesis within 24 hours. So every 24 hours, the plant goes through this photosynthetic period. Okay. What it does during this time is it's the conversion of sugars into complex carbohydrates. Okay. When achieved, the plant sap, which is obviously in the plant, contains high levels of these carbohydrates. These carbohydrates, or this conversion from those simple sugars into these carbohydrates, is actually really essential for the plant's health. So, and this is amazing what can actually happen. So if plants are completely photosynthesizing, they can increase their photosynthetic capacity between 150 and 600%. So imagine how quickly your plants could grow if you're giving them what they need, what they really need. Plants also develop resistance to soil-borne pathogens. Plants, in order to do this, they require adequate levels of magnesium, iron, manganese, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Again, we'll go into more detail and I'll explain it more when we go into the workshop. So this is a little pie chart I did. Not a very good attempt, but there you go. So this is a 24-hour period. So obviously we've got 24 at the top and then 6, 12, 18, 100. So you might not be able to see this. Yeah, just about. So between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m., we have cell division and sugar utilization. Again, we'll go into this in detail. Between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., this is peak photosynthesis. So this is the period where the plants are doing the most work, basically. And then between 5 p.m. and 3 p.m., we've got sugar transport. So this is basically where they're processing all those sugars they've accumulated from the photosynthetic process. So stage 2 is complete protein synthesis. This stage relates to how effective plants can turn nitrogen into complete proteins and amino acids. We basically do a very similar thing, is that when we're eating food, they're changing into proteins and amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of life. They're part of how DNA is formed. So it's really, really essential. And the comparisons between, or the parallels between us and plants are actually quite interesting. So when nitrogen is not fully synthesized, then the excess nitrates or ammonium, these are 2 forms of nitrogen, attract pests. So imagine if your plant is crowded out and it's not photosynthesizing properly, this will lead to it not being able to process these proteins. And this is how the pests actually get attracted, because the plant will actually start putting out nitrates or ammonium into the soil because it's not able to process it. this is what attracts pests. So when a plant reaches complete photosynthesis, it is able to convert all nitrogen into proteins and amino acids every 24-hour period. It becomes resistant to pests with simple digestive systems. So there tend to be the pests that like suck stuff on plants. And plants also require adequate levels of magnesium, sulfur, molybdenum, and boron. Again, we'll go into how we can actually get these things for the plant. Stage 3, increased lipid synthesis. So these are basically fats. So this is concerned with proper nutrition. Plants prefer to feed on nutrients released by soil biology. They have for millions of years. It's only the last 100 years that we think spraying something on it is actually better. And plants are able to develop surplus energy, and this turns into fats and lipids. So this is basically the nutrition of the plant, essentially. So increased lipid synthesis results in plants being able to absorb the majority of their nutrition through microbes. Plants develop resistance to airborne fungal and bacterial pathogens, and plants require a very aggressive microbiome and rhizosphere. So the microbiome is the soil food web. That's the bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes. And the rhizosphere is the interaction between the roots and those microbes. Stage 4, increased plant secondary metabolite synthesis. That's a bit of a mouthful. This is where plants have full natural expression. So if there was no interruption from human beings, like 100 years ago, plants would just naturally be doing this. This is what they do in the wild when they're given enough room. And this is what produces the medicinal benefits or compounds. So when someone says a plant is medicinal, it might not necessarily be medicinal. Just because the herb naturally has a medicinal quality, it doesn't mean that it's actually medicinal for you, unless it's hitting stage 4 and stage 1, 2, and 3. The chances are it's not saying what it says. It's not doing what it says on the tin. And in America, they really discovered this through cannabis trials. So obviously, it's been legalized there. Most of this information is, or especially this part where it's the terpenes and the bioflavonoids. This is all coming from cannabis growers. It's really interesting. So increased plant secondary metabolite synthesis happens when the plant's immune pathways are triggered by microbes. So we'll go more into detail, but there are certain microbes that elicit immune responses that trigger certain processes in the plant that will basically, it's like when we take a supplement, we can fight off a cold or whatever. You know, if we have a vitamin C, it's a similar type of process. Plants develop increased resistance to the entire beetle family. It's not just really just the beetle family, it's most insects. But this is his research that he's found. And plants require the correct microbes in the plant microbiome. So we need to have particular microbes in there to trigger these responses. So how plants use energy. Plants are constantly cycling energy, whether it be physical, biological, chemical, or electrical. If these 4 dynamic processes are not cycling naturally and to full capacity, then plants will suffer and be prone to attack. I'm not asking everyone to do all of this because I'm not doing all of this. I'm trying all of this out. This is just top level information coming from people I've been exposed to, and it's like the leading stuff. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to come by this, but I'm not going to put pressure on myself to do it all in one season. This is about being true to yourself and being organic. Yeah, so don't think that you need to be overloaded or overwhelmed. So photosynthesis, the most efficient engine nature has ever created. It is the most wonderful process. It keeps every single bit of life on this planet alive. Without photosynthesis, pardon my French, we'd all be fucked. And it's really important that we kind of have a lot of gratitude for this. Photosynthesis basically transforms electromagnetic energy from the sun into plant sugars. And it's the mitochondria in the cells of the plants that transforms that electrical energy into the chemical, physical, and biological processes, and then back into electrical energy when it goes into an animal or us. So we are actually part of photosynthesis, not, slightly disconnected, but because we have these mitochondria as well, they are processing those sugars that we eat back into electrical energy. This is what powers us, basically. So if we're eating really healthy food, we're going to have high energy levels. That's because of these processes. So the use of energy. So energy can never be created or it can never be destroyed. It just changes. So we can lose or gain energy from one place to another. This happens all the time. Simple physics, obviously. So the loss of energy is oxidation. I mentioned this before. So this is really important to kind of, if anything, I would try and remember this is one of the complicated processes, is because this will come up all the time. This is what catches a lot of growers out. So soil, plants, and humans are all susceptible to this loss. The gain of energy is reduction. I think I'm right in saying this. It's a chemistry expression, but if you're reducing something, you're putting more and more energy into one place. So this means that energy is stored in that one place and can be distributed by the biology when it's required. So when a plant needs it to produce fruit, these processes will help that. So if you have reduced soil, you'll have more energy, which means the biology can then transport that energy to the part of the plant that's needed. So when we continually take from an ecosystem, we deplete it of energy. When we continually give energy, we have energy in reserve. But a healthy ecosystem is essential for this. If we're just growing one plant in one area and we're not putting energy back into the soil, soon enough that soil will lose its energy. And I think this is one of the best ways to explain it. It's just about energy transformation, conversion, and all these processes. So human health, plant health, and soil health, these are all interconnected. We've known this for tens of thousands of years, but we obviously, we've been told that this isn't important. So one example of this is oxidative stress, as we mentioned in the previous slide. So if the soil becomes oxidized, it loses energy. This in turn transfers to human beings through the plant or animals we eat. Oxidative stress in human beings leads to chronic disease, leads to cancers, leads to inflammation, leads to, the papers I've read are pretty compelling, let me tell you. Gut bacteria in the soil food web. So the human colon and the neurons in the gut are our ancient protection system. It's the gut, which is basically telling the brain what's going on to a degree in regards to the food we eat in our environment through the senses. It's quite amazing. So the gut is actually protecting us. That's why we should trust our gut. How many times I have not. It's also called our second brain. If you go on YouTube, there's so much stuff on there. It's quite amazing. Our Our immune system is governed by our gut microbiome, which is governed by the microbes in the soil. We are literally what we eat. So plants need to reach maturity. So once plants pass the stage of infancy, they start requiring more space, more sunlight, air, and water. So it's quite easy to crowd out. Remember what I said about spacing. Think about how big the plant will get when it reaches maturity. So this is for their over and underground needs. As the plant is a holistic organism, we can think of it in terms of as above, so below. Both are really important. So as discussed in plant health, for plants to reach maturity, i.e. flowering, fruiting, and producing seed, they will need a combination of nutrients, biology, and the elements. The elements are really, really important in this. So the stronger the breeze, the thicker the trees. So plants can grow very strong. They need a balanced environment. They need a strong breeze. So back to the slide of transplanting. When you're growing a seedling and you're potting it on, I'm sure most of you know this, but you need to harden them up. So you need to take them out into the elements, because naturally they wouldn't grow in pots. They'd be just growing in the ground. They need to be exposed to the wind. Yeah, not too much, just gently, but just help them to acclimatize to the new environment you're going to put them in. They need the right amount of light and heat, and they need the ideal zone to grow in. Again, refer to last webinar and workshop. And they need balanced nutrients in the right amount and a biodiverse soil biome. All of these things are important. If you miss one out, it may not affect it too much, but we're talking about holistic. It's the same with us. We need exercise. We need proper amount of sleep. We need to be outside. We need to get vitamin D from the sunlight. The plants are very much like us in this way. So those plants that fall prey to pests, disease, or pathogens are not the plants that you want to use or eat. They're the weak plants. They're the plants that we could have done something about it, but if you have two plants and one of them doesn't get attacked and the other one does, you know the one that hasn't got attacked has got stronger genes. So these are weak and will not be beneficial for the human body. Those that become victims to the elements are plants that will not pass on strong genes to the next generation. Of course, we can only do what we can do, but sometimes it's just the seed, or the fact that that plant's not in the right place. There's loads of things, but you'll learn all of that. So flowering, pollinating, and fruiting. This is a very delicate time of the plant's life. It requires different needs, and its energy distribution changes from vegetative to reproductive. As most of its energy is put into this process, it can leave the plants open to attack. So as plants go through their cycle, they distribute their energy to different places. Up until this time, just before flowering, their energy is spent on growing vegetatively in their roots. This is where they're collecting all the nutrients they need at that point, but they're also establishing themselves for the most important part of their life, which is flowering, producing fruit, and creating the next generation. So this enables them, this process, the vegetative process, enables them to photosynthesize more efficiently and to spread their roots to give them maximum coverage, so they can be more efficient in mineral accumulation. And the bigger the root area, the more interaction between the biology and the roots. So the biology is obviously getting all the nutrients. So the more space they have to grow in the roots, the healthier the plant will become. So harvesting and seed saving. Probably the funnest time of the year. So harvesting your crops. The time we harvest crops will depend on the type of crop, the species and genus, what is happening with the climate and our own needs. Sometimes, you know, for instance, a squash plant, it will take a little bit longer to mature if there hasn't been enough sunlight that like there was this year. I know a lot of people that had they didn't grow many squash because there just wasn't enough sunlight. So sometimes you might need to crop them a bit later. And again, it depends on your needs. Sometimes you just can't be there. So if we plan out planting effectively, we can be harvesting one crop while sowing another. So this is called succession cropping. And this allows us to get more from, or allows you to get more from your space and time, and to keep the soil covered. So you can be growing one crop just as you're about to harvest it. You can then be sowing the next seeds, getting ready to plant, and that crop start to grow. And we're mimicking, it's called biomimicry. So we're mimicking what nature does naturally. Saving seed. So saving your seeds, there are many different ways to harvest seed. Depending on the crop, there are various methods to apply, and it will also require you to dry out the seed. So some crops like quinoa, I grew a load of quinoa this year, and it does take a bit of work. It's the first time I've grown quinoa, and it was just like, wow, this has taken me hours, but it's a lot of fun. It requires you to thresh, to sieve, and to winnow. So you have to dry the plants out, then you have to get the seed off the plant, then you have to sieve them to get more of the biomass out, and then you have to winnow it. Squash is really easy. You just separate it from the fruit, and then you put the seeds in some, well, you take all the other bits off, and then you put the seed into some water, and that just cleans the seed off. And then you can, as long as they're viable, you can then just put them, dry them, or freeze them, however wet you want to do that. But whatever way we do it, we have to extract them and dry them before we store or share them. So saving seed is one of the most important cycles that we can complete, along with cycling of organic matter. Once I started saving seed, I became really empowered. I'm not saving all my seed. I'm trying different varieties each year just to kind of get used to it. But I'm getting to that point where I'm starting to become a lot more confident. Okay, I definitely know that's going to grow. So, you know, last year I saved some squash seed. I grew some this year. They came out beautifully. And that made me really happy, because I was like, God, I don't have to buy that type of seed now. You know, I've got these for next year. So the greatest thing about saving seed is we're taking the best characteristics of a species to evolve the next generation. So again, we want these seeds to adapt to the changing environment. So which plant has coped best with changing conditions, i.e. early frosts, pest infestation, or disease? So deciding which plants to keep for saving seed can be confusing, but a basic rule is to follow is this: to pick the best looking plant that is growing in the poorest conditions. For instance, a tomato plant that has received less sun or water than others, but looks really healthy, will have a genetic advantage. So that's really, when I started to realize that, I was like, right. So this is how they adapt. So this again is really important. This is something I really care about, because this is about cycles. So, and this is the problem with our society, right? We're just taking all this stuff, but so many people aren't giving back. So giving back to the soil, just as nature does. Nature is not linear, it's cyclical. Nature doesn't waste. Everything is cycled, ingested, decomposed, refined, redistributed. Just like energy is. Matter, energy, it's the same thing, really. So this function is performed by the soil food web, the elements, and geological processes. Obviously, we have no real control over geological processes, but the other two we have an influence over. So learning from your mistakes, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, once I stopped criticizing myself, saying, "Oh, you didn't do that right," or "Oh, the slug ate that," and "bastard slug," all that stuff. What is nature trying to tell me? Because nature is not, it's objective. It's not plotting against you, even though sometimes you think it is, but it's always trying to tell us something, and if we sit back and just observe, we can start to understand. So nature is perfect. If something isn't working, like one of your plants is being attacked, ask yourself, why is that? Nature is trying to teach us that it needs something we haven't provided. Some of you, I'm sure you've had children or when they're babies and they cry, and you might not know what they want. You have to kind of work it out, right? It's one of those things that gets really frustrating. So it could be a plant in the wrong place, or it doesn't have the right nutrients. And again, don't get too wrapped up in having to work it all out in one season. It takes time. So will you have excess crops, or do you have excess crops? Storing, preserving, and trading. So for many of our crops, we can store them for long periods of time. Squash, for instance, can be kept for 5 to 6 months. I've done this a few years running, and they've still tasted absolutely wonderful. The thicker skinned ones are obviously going to keep for longer. You have to keep in the right conditions, out of sunlight and in a cool area. Carrots, we can also keep for months when stored correctly. So when you put them in sand, that will stop that process of decomposition. We can preserve many of our crops. There are many ways to preserve food. These are just a few of them. We've been doing a lot of these for thousands of years, so they're tried and tested. And depending on what you're going to do, you can use different ones, but most of them are actually quite easy. Some of them, like smoking, requires a room to do that, but people are always coming up with new ways to do things. So I think growing food is great, and this is what I love to do. I don't do a lot of preserving. I do some, but not a lot. But if it's something that really excites you, look into it, because it's going to be really useful in the future. So sharing your harvest with your community. When you have excess crops, then you can share them with the people you love. That's what I do. If you know other growers, you can even trade the crops, which is really cool as well. Setting up a seed circle. So once you start saving seed, connect with other people that are going to do the same thing, especially if you're using heirloom and heritage seeds. And maybe you could even come up with your own. There are people out there that are crossing, like tomato plants, for instance. We can go into the workshop. Seed circles are an amazing way to complete a natural cycle, and we're creating community through that. So perhaps next year we could create one between us. That's just an idea out there for you. So thanks very much. I know it was quite long. Now it's time for questions.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. I love that. I took loads and loads of notes.
Thank you.
Got to say, Real Seed Company is my absolute favourite as well. I've already ordered my seeds. I just haven't got my seed potatoes yet, but I've already put my order in, because I think a lot of people are going to be picking up on this year, and more people are becoming very aware of the importance of growing our own. So that would be my handy hint, is maybe think about obviously planning now, but very much thinking about maybe ordering now. And keeping them somewhere cool and dark and tucked away, and ready for when you need them. But what I'd love to do now, guys, is if we can stop sharing the screen, John, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
And then no, it's fine. Thank you. There's a couple of messages popping up in the chat, John. But what I'd like to do is just, I know we'd like to give a little bit of time to you guys and sort of 15-20 minute look at if anyone's got any questions or thoughts or anything they'd like to share. If you could put your little hand up, or yeah, we've got one coming up. Put your little hand up or drop a note into the chat. Someone did ask when the workshop is, John. And I
2
can
weeks from
access
today.
something. Sorry?
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks
So,
from today.
yeah,
Fantastic.
I don't know what the date is, sorry.
Let me have a look. I will double check that and then we'll go into the questions. I couldn't access, I'm not very IT minded and I couldn't access our site to let me find out. So it's on the 21st.
Oh, do you know what? It's 21st. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. 21st. I imagine it's the same time as 7 p.m. That's usually when we do them. But if you ever miss them, there's always the catch-up opportunity, and I've put the previous one into the chat. So I want to ask, is it Sheena? Am I saying that correctly? Sheena, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, hi, sorry, can you, no, you
Hello.
can't see me yet, I'm just...
That's all right, you can put your camera on, it's
video.
no problem.
Have I done it yet?
There we go, we can see you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm learning to grow at the moment, and I've got a northeast facing garden that's very soggy and a lot of builders rubbish under the soil. So I'm just trying to grow things in pots, and I'm having mixed results really.
Okay.
And I wondered if you've got any start off advice.
Okay. So how long have you been attempting to grow for?
I've been going a year.
Okay.
And I've managed to do tomatoes and
Cool.
chard. Carrots are rubbish. I got one turnip. A cabbage.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah. And I've got some garlic on the go at the moment, and I've just planted a bit of ginger in after watching a YouTube video. But it's just that, so for example, I don't know, I'm going to watch your other video that has been posted, but I don't even know where to start, because you go to garden centres and it's like all this peat free whatever, and it's by John Innes and who that and the other, and it's like, well, I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know if there's any point or a website or a blog or anything you could point me to.
Okay, I'm gonna suggest you go and watch the webinar on the workshop.
Okay.
Or request the slides.
Okay.
Because the previous slides will tell you all the different composting methods you can do to create good soil.
So I did buy a compost bin, and I was putting stuff in. It was vegetables or newspaper or grass cuttings, but then I got loads of slugs in it, and the foxes kept hiding in it. So it was just like, oh. So that didn't work out terribly well. So, but I'll go and look at that. Okay,
so so I would always steer clear of those like plastic bins.
Yeah.
Because this is just my personal thing, right? Is plastic is kind of, we don't know what's leaching into that to start off with. So that's one thing. So there's various methods, composting methods you can try, depending on how much time you've got, how much energy you've got, how much compost you want to produce, what your budget is, these types of things. And it's because it's about planning, right? You've got to think like, what do I want to grow next year? Yeah, think about what you want to grow and watch those videos or the video from last month, because that will give you loads of different options about what is the best compost you can make. So I'll give you an example. If you don't have much time, and you're a lover of worms, you can do vermicomposting, because you put all your kitchen waste in there and they'll do all the work for you. You can cover it so the foxes don't get in. With slugs, the thing is, slugs mainly eat dead vegetation. They're decomposers. So you're going to kind of get them in a lot of those situations.
I get them on with plants as well, slugs and snails, whole load.
Yeah. That can also be avoided by having really healthy soil.
Yeah.
So what I'd say is, if you can make your own compost,
Okay.
make it. Because you're not going to make the perfect compost straight away, but if you're serious about growing and you want to save money in the future, it's better to do it yourself.
Okay.
Because the thing is, as growers, when you first start out, you want to grow as much as you can.
Yeah.
But of course, everyone wants to, right? But we're having to reprogram the way we think about nature and the way we want to live our life, right? We don't want to rely on these big systems anymore, because they're poisonous and they're not helping us, and they might provide an illusion for us for a little while, but to be self-sufficient is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. And really it's about the mindset, so it's like, if you look at the previous videos or the slides, there's so much good information there, and that will just give you a pathway that you can follow.
Thank you.
I don't want to give you like a direct answer, because it's kind of, I could say do this, do that, but you've got to work out, ask yourself the questions like, how much time do I have to commit to it? Yeah, how much energy do you have? Because some people might not. I do hot composting, so I do thermophilic composting. It requires a lot of work, but you can get it done in like 21 days. So you can create compost in 21 days. But it requires a lot of work. If you, not the lazy approach, but if you don't have the time, go for vermicomposting, because the worms will do all the work for you. Or you can go down, if you eat meat, for instance, you can do a thing called bokashi, which decomposes bone and meat. So if you're just a veggie eater, go for vermicompost. Yeah. You can get some compost worms. There's a little bit of an outlay, but once you've outlaid, they'll just keep producing, keep multiplying. You can give them away to your friends, and that will probably take about 3 months to produce, which isn't long. Or you can do a mouldering compost pile.
A what?
So you can get a mouldering compost pile. That will be on the slides. Okay, you might still attract slugs and stuff, but there's no one answer for everything.
Okay.
You're always going to have a bit of a trade-off, But for me, it's about learning the process, because once you learn the process, you can apply it to many different ways. Okay. If that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. How do I get? I don't know that lady's name who's from the PFFA.
Oh, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Sorry.
That's all right.
If I put my email in the chat, could I have the slides from the last?
Yeah, I'll have to ask my colleague to do it, because I'm not that clever.
Or shall I just contact you guys by the website and ask? Is that better to do it that way?
Yeah, because technically I'm off for the next 3 days, so actually that'd be a lot quicker. They'll be able to get it to you, and they're technically far more brilliant than I am. So yeah, by all means, please do.
Thank you.
I'm just having a look in the chat. Where can we get the slides to the previous video? So if you go a little bit further up the chat, guys, you'll see that I've dropped a YouTube link in there, and that will take you to the previous presentation and the slides. So go on to that. If there's any issues, just head to the website and email us. It'll be the info@the-pffa.org. And one of the team can connect you up if you're struggling with that particular link, but it should work fine. I double checked it whilst we were doing this. So please do go and have a look and go back through that. And John will be doing another one in a couple of weeks. Are there any more questions, thoughts, anything anyone wants to share this evening, or is everyone happy? By all means, please do shout now. Cannot see the link. Can you post it again? You guys are asking a lot, aren't you? I've just told you I'm not technical. Hang on a sec.
Thank you, everybody.
Someone's just popped in. Audrey's popped in. We had a whole row of in situ seedlings trumped by slugs. How can we stop them doing that? I'll just go back and try and find the link, John, while you do that.
Okay. So slugs are like our formidable enemy to a degree. They're, again, it's about plant. So it depends on where you got the seed from, because it's, again, like what I said about in this webinar is about seed health and soil health. If you're, see, there's two approaches. You can grow them in pots and then plant them out. That's one way to kind of avoid that. It's a really tricky one, because you probably have to give me more context to kind of, so maybe I'll tell you what, because that question's not, and I think if there's no other questions, if you just email me that question with more of a context, like what seeds they are, whereabouts you are, as much context as possible, it'll be easier for me to answer it. Is that, whoever answered that question, sorry.
No, that's a good idea. John, is there any chance you could just pop, I don't know if you've done it already, pop your email into the chat, and then
Yeah, sure.
the person who very kindly asked the question, Audrey, just keep an eye on the chat a
Audrey.
minute, my love, and John's email will be in there, and do reach out and he can have a chat with you about that, my love. Fantastic. Fantastic. No, that's brilliant. Guys, it's been an incredibly informative evening. I've got so much to go and think about. I already had lots of ideas in my head, but this has just motivated me to get on with it a little bit more actually now. So super exciting, and I'm sure it's had this similar effect on the rest of you.
Yeah.
John, I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. That was just wonderful and really genuinely enjoyable.
And the workshop's going to be even more informative, more interactive, and just so you guys know, like, the workshop's really the place where we can start interacting. You can start giving me your situations or your goals, so I can then kind of advise you a little bit more directly and give you advice about what's going to work for you with your context. So all I'd say is, like, think, the reason I've done it this way is so you understand, like, you start planning now and come up with some questions perhaps that you want answered that will be relative to when you start growing next year, and it will make it a lot more kind of interactive for you, and you'll get a lot more from it. It's sometimes really difficult to think about these things, so maybe just contemplate, like, if you just, like, you know, I won't show it, actually I will show one more thing. So I'm going to show this to you. I'm going to show this to you guys as an idea of what I did. But this isn't anything to do with growing. This is called an affirmation board, right? So this is what I created the other day with my partner. I'm just showing you as a visual representation. This is a great way to do that. I just had this idea, right? Plot out, imagine what you want your garden to look like, what you want your growing space to look like. Put all the vegetables there, yeah? Do a bit of research, because that will bring that out of you into a visual representation rather than having it stuck in your head. You don't have to draw or paint or whatever. You can write it down just in words. But it's this has got nothing to do with it, but it's really helped me to understand, like, what I really want from my life, what direction I want to go in, the goals I want to achieve. And you can do this for anything. So I just want to kind of set that out there just as an idea for you guys to just kind of really dream about the garden you want to have, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, John. I've really enjoyed that. I can tell everyone else has had a good time. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. Go have a wonderful evening. This recording will be available soon. And if you haven't, can I suggest, if you've got any friends you think would be keen to see what John's got to say or read some of his stuff, or other partners and people we collaborate with, if you go onto our website and sign up to the newsletter, all completely free, and it also gives you a heads up of other courses and webinars and things that are coming up in the future. So you've got a little bit more time to plan in advance. So please do encourage anyone who you think might be interested to sign up. Like I say, everything's free, but then they'll get the information, including very much John's activity on our newsletters and updates. So thank you so much for your time this evening. Go and have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.